The station had already decided the human would be a problem before he even stepped off the shuttle. Concord Spindle hung in silent orbit above a pale gas giant, its polished corridors filled with species that preferred order, predictability, and clearly labeled danger. Administrator Valen Sor had spent the last 19 standard hours dealing with anything but order. Food panic. Translation disputes. A formal complaint that a visiting choir qualified as a weapon. By the time the alert came in about the incoming human delegation requesting a live reception instead of automated intake, Valen had reached the quiet conclusion that whatever stepped off that shuttle would make his shift worse. Humans had a reputation. Not for aggression, not exactly. That would have been easier to categorize. No, the problem with humans was inconsistency. They did not behave like prey, and they did not behave like predators either. They broke patterns. And anything that broke patterns made administration difficult. So Valen descended from the gantry already prepared to dislike the ambassador. The shuttle doors opened with a soft hydraulic sigh. The human stepped out like he had all the time in the galaxy. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing fabric that looked more ceremonial than practical. No visible armor. No visible environmental adaptation. Just confidence, carried like it was a natural state of being. That alone was unsettling. Valen extended a lower limb in formal greeting. Ambassador Rourke. Welcome to Concord Spindle. I am Administrator Valen Sor. I trust your journey was acceptable. The human smiled. Valen had studied that expression in briefings. Teeth exposed without threat. A signal that meant friendliness, apparently. It still looked like a warning. Smooth ride, the human said, taking the offered limb with controlled warmth. Appreciate the welcome. The contact lasted less than a second, but Valen withdrew immediately. Humans radiated heat. It was distracting. Unnecessary. Another inefficiency. Your quarters are prepared, Valen said. The reception assembly begins in 90 minutes. I advise rest until then. You say that like rest is realistic on a station this interesting. There was that tone. Not dismissive. Not challenging. Just curious. Valen had learned to distrust curiosity. Curiosity was how incidents began. He was about to explain that interesting on Concord Spindle usually meant administratively exhausting when the sound came from the corridor behind them. A sharp, rapid clicking scrape. Valen's sensory frills tightened instantly. Not now. Handler Jess appeared a second later, already losing control of the situation. The tether in his hands was taut, jerking with uneven force as something at the other end resisted with growing interest. The Varric cub entered the docking bay like a problem that had slipped past containment. Midnight scales. Silver eyes. Already too large to be called harmless. Not yet trained enough to be predictable. Of all the possible moments for the cub to break containment, it had chosen this one. Administrator, Jess started, breath short, grip failing. Exercise gate malfunction. I gathered, Valen snapped, already calculating outcomes. Diplomatic incident probability rising. Risk classification escalation likely. Containment failure during first contact. This was how reports began. Ambassador, Valen said sharply, do not move. That was standard protocol. Stillness reduced stimulus. Reduced perceived threat. Reduce. The human didn't move. But he didn't look away either. That was wrong. Most species avoided direct eye contact with a Varric juvenile, especially one already keyed into motion. It was basic survival behavior. Lower your presence. Reduce engagement. The human did the opposite. He watched the cub with open, unguarded interest. That's the Varric juvenile from the brief, he said calmly. Valen turned his head, slow and deliberate. Yes, he said. And he is not a demonstration. Beautiful, the human added. Jess made a small, horrified sound. Ambassador, respectfully, do not advance. I'm not, the human replied, lifting both hands slightly in a non-threatening posture. That part was correct. Technically. It didn't matter. Keth had already locked onto him. The cub circled once, claws ticking softly against the dock plating. Head low. Tail shifting. Scenting. Valen watched the posture shift and felt something cold settle in his core. Curiosity. Tipping into overload. Jess, Valen said, voice sharp. Pull him back. Jess reached for the tether. Wrong moment. The movement crossed Keth's vision just as the human adjusted his stance by a fraction. Nothing aggressive, nothing sudden, but enough. Instinct moved faster than thought. The cub lunged. There was no warning. No escalation. Just motion. But Keth slammed into the human's chest and clamped his jaws around the ambassador's left forearm. The sound was wet. Immediate. Blood spread across the gray fabric almost instantly. Jess shouted something incoherent. Valen's mind skipped straight past the present and into consequences. Medical emergency. Venom protocol. Multi-species incident. Council review. Potential interspecies conflict. All of it unfolding in the space of a single bite. This was the moment everything broke. And then, the human spoke. Not loudly. Not in panic. Not even in anger. Hey, he said, voice steady despite the blood already running down his arm. Easy, little man. That arm is in use. Keth released him. Instantly. The cub stumbled backward as if struck, scales bleaching pale in shock. Silence hit the docking bay like a physical force. Valen didn't understand what he was seeing. That was not how this worked. A Varric bite should escalate. Should trigger dominance response, panic, aggression, or restraint protocols. Not this. The human didn't step back. Didn't shout. Didn't demand separation. He just stood there, bleeding, watching the cub like nothing about the situation matched the expected outcome. Keth pressed himself against the bulkhead, body folding inward despite his size. The predator that had just acted on pure instinct now looked smaller. Uncertain. Afraid. Valen felt something shift, subtle and wrong, in the pattern of the moment. This was no longer following any known model. The human glanced down at his arm, flexed his fingers once as if checking function, then looked back at the cub. Still calm. Still steady. Like the bite hadn't defined the situation. Like it wasn't the most important thing in the room. And that was the first moment Valen realized, with growing unease, that the real problem had not been the bite. The real problem was how the human had chosen to respond to it. Because whatever happened next was not going to fit inside any protocol Conquered Spindle had ever written. Medical team, Doc 9 now. Valen's voice cut through the frozen air, sharp enough to restart motion. Systems lit up. Alerts triggered. Somewhere deeper in the station, response units were already moving. Venom protocol, he added, stepping forward. Ambassador, do not. I'm fine. The human's tone wasn't dismissive. It was simply certain. That made it worse. Valen reached him in 2 quick movements, scanning the wound with trained precision. The bite had broken skin cleanly. Multiple punctures. Depth uncertain. Blood flow steady but not catastrophic yet. Varric's saliva carries enzymatic agents, Valen said, forcing control into his voice. You may experience clotting failure, muscle degradation, systemic. Yeah, the human said, glancing at his arm again. Seems rude. Valen stared at him. This was not the correct response. This was not even within the range of acceptable responses. Jess was still trying to regain control of the tether, but Keth wasn't resisting anymore. The cub had flattened himself against the wall, claws tucked in tight, head low, scales washed into a pale, uneven color that Valen had only ever seen in extreme stress. The cub's translator flickered, catching up to his voice. I bit you. The words came out small. Fractured. The docking bay went quiet again, but this time it wasn't shock. It was focus. Every eye, every sensory organ, shifted toward the human. This was the moment. The point where response defined outcome. A complaint would trigger formal charges. A demand for isolation would activate hazard protocols. Even silence would be taken as implied escalation. This was where the incident became a case file. The human lowered himself. Not away. Not back. He moved slowly, deliberately, ignoring the blood still running along his arm, and brought himself level with the cub. Valen's frills tightened in alarm. "Ambassador, do not engage." The human didn't look at him. "Hey," he said softly. Keth's eyes snapped up. Right. Fixed entirely on the human now. "Look at me." The cub hesitated. Then he did. Up close, the difference in scale was obvious. The cub was larger than most adult visitors. Built for pursuit. Built for damage. And yet, in that moment, he didn't look dangerous. He looked like something waiting for a verdict. "I bid you," Keth said again, voice trembling through the translator. "I bid a guest." There was a pause. A breath. Something in the air shifted, not in volume but in weight. The human exhaled slowly, and Valen saw the pain tighten briefly across his expression before it disappeared again. "You got scared," he said. Not accusing. Not defensive. Just stating it. "And you made a bad choice." Keth's scales flickered, uneven and uncertain. "That's not the same as being bad." Valen felt something in his internal processing stutter. That was not logic. That was not procedure. That was something else. "I hurt you," Keth said, quieter now. "They will send me away." There was the real fear. Not punishment. Exile. The human tilted his head slightly, studying the cub like the answer mattered. "I've had worse," he said after a moment. "Kitchen knife. One truly evil farm animal." One of the human guards behind him made a strangled sound that might have been laughter. Valen did not understand how that was relevant. Keth didn't either. But the tension shifted anyway. Just enough. The human adjusted his stance, then, despite Valen's attempt to interrupt, reached out with his uninjured hand. Slow. Visible. No sudden movement. He rested it gently against the cub's head ridge. Jess froze. Valen froze. Half the dock held its breath. The cub shivered. Not from aggression. From something closer to disbelief. "You apologize," the human said quietly. "You learned. You do better next time." The words settled into the space between them like something solid. "That's how this works." Keth lowered himself fully to the floor. Not forced. Not restrained. Chosen. "I am sorry," he said. The translator carried it clearly. No distortion. No hesitation. The human smiled again, softer this time. "Accepted, kid." The medical team burst through the docking bay entrance at that exact moment, equipment already active, scanning fields spreading across the scene. They stopped. Not because there was no emergency, but because nothing about what they saw matched the alert they had received. A bleeding human diplomat. A predator cub lying low in front of him. No struggle. No containment. No escalation. Just stillness. "Ambassador," the lead medic snapped back into motion first, moving in with controlled urgency. "We need to stabilize." "Go ahead," the human said, finally shifting his attention away from the cub. "Try not to make it worse than it already is." "That is statistically unlikely," the medic replied flatly, already cutting away the damaged sleeve. Valen stepped back half a pace, not because he needed space, but because something in the situation had moved beyond his immediate control. He watched as the medics worked, sealing, scanning, analyzing. The expected complications did not appear. Bleeding slowed faster than predicted. Tissue response stabilized instead of degrading. The lead medic's expression shifted from urgency to irritation. "This should be worse," she muttered. The human glanced down at his arm. "That's usually what people say about me." No one laughed. Because Valen was still trying to understand what had just happened. A Category 5 hazard had attacked a diplomatic representative. No retaliation. No escalation. No demand for consequence. Instead, the human had corrected the behavior. Not the incident. The behavior. And the cub had responded. Immediately. That was not how fear-based species interactions worked. That was not how predator psychology worked. That was not how any of this worked. Across the dock, Keth had not moved from where he lay. His eyes stayed fixed on the human. Not with hunger. Not with dominance. With something Valen struggled to classify. Tension. Focused. Intent. Unbroken. Like the bite had not defined the moment. Like what came after had. And somewhere deep in Valen's administrative instincts, a new problem began to form. Not a crisis. Not yet. Something more complicated. Because this was no longer a contained incident. This was a pattern breaking in real time. And patterns, once broken, did not easily return to their original shape. By the time the human was moved to the medical platform, the story had already outrun the truth. Half the station knew. By the time the other half caught up, the details had changed. In some versions, the human had nearly lost his arm. In others, he had subdued the cub with a look. In at least one retelling, the bite had been intentional. A test, a challenge, something only humans would consider normal. Valen listened to none of it. He stood just inside the medical bay, watching the only version that mattered. Reality. Ambassador Elia Rourke sat on the platform with his arm exposed, the damaged fabric removed, the wound sealed under a transparent medical mesh. Instruments hovered around him, scanning, analyzing, recalculating. Dr. Vaughn did not look pleased. "This should be worse," she said again, sharper this time. She adjusted the scan field, ran it again, then again, as if repetition might force the results to make sense. "Varic jaw pressure is sufficient to fracture bone," she continued. "Enzymatic compounds should be degrading surrounding tissue. Yet." She paused, irritation tightening her voice. "Your bleeding has already stabilized. Muscle structure intact. No systemic collapse." Elia glanced down at his arm, then back at her. "So the official diagnosis is that I'm annoyingly alive." "The official diagnosis," Vaughn snapped, "is that your species violates good medical judgment." Valen remained silent. He had reviewed human physiology before. Dense bone structure. Rapid clotting. Aggressive immune response. High tolerance for pain. Individually, each trait was manageable. Together, they created something harder to predict. That was the problem. Not strength. Unpredictability. "Ambassador," Valen said, stepping closer. "The council liaison has requested a formal statement." "They can have one," Elia replied. "Give me a minute. I'm busy disappointing your doctor." "You are not disappointing me," Vaughn said flatly. "You are actively interfering with my expectations." "That sounds worse." "It is worse." Valen would have continued the discussion, redirected it, stabilized the situation back into protocol. But the sound from the doorway interrupted everything. A soft scrape. Careful. Deliberate. Every movement controlled. Keth stood at the entrance. Jess was behind him, but not pulling, not restraining. Just watching. Ready. But not intervening. That alone was new. The cub moved forward slowly, each step placed with visible effort, like he was navigating something far more complex than distance. In his mouth, held carefully between closed teeth, was a folded square of cloth. Valen recognized it. The human's. Blood-stained earlier. Clean now. Washed. Dried. Badly folded, but intact. Keth approached the platform and stopped just short of it. He lowered himself to the floor, placing the cloth down with careful precision. "I brought back your blood cloth," he said. The translator carried his voice clearly, but the strain beneath it was unmistakable. "And I am sorry again." He hesitated. The next words came quieter. "I know I already said it." But the bite made the first apology weak. Silence settled over the room. Not empty. Focused. Elia didn't move immediately. For a second, Valen thought, finally, that the human might shift toward something more expected. Authority. Distance. Formal acceptance. Instead, his expression softened. Not dramatically. Not performatively. Just enough. "That was kind of you," he said. Keth's head lowered further, shoulders pulling inward despite his size. "Are you angry?" Vaughn made a small, frustrated sound. "You should be," she muttered. "It would simplify things." Elia ignored her completely. "No," he said. Then, after a brief pause, "Sore? Yeah. Angry? No." The distinction landed in the room like something unfamiliar. Valen felt it again, that same disruption in pattern recognition. Pain without retaliation. Injury without escalation. The human shifted slightly, then extended his uninjured hand again. Slow. Predictable. Visible. He rested it gently between the cub's head ridges. Keth shivered. Not from fear this time. From something else. Something Valen had no immediate classification for. You got scared, Elia said quietly. You made a bad call. Keth's scales flickered, uncertain blue. Then you knew it was a bad call, the human continued, and you came back anyway. The pause. That matters. The cub's breathing slowed. Valen noticed it because everything else in the room seemed to still around that single change. My mother says apologies only count if you change after them, Keth said. Elia smiled faintly. Your mother sounds smart. There was no tension left in the cub's posture now. No defensive angle. No readiness to react. Just attention. Focused entirely on the human. Valen understood something then. Not fully. Not comfortably. But enough. The bite had not been the defining event. This was the return. The apology. The response to that apology. This was where the pattern had shifted. Not from danger to safety. But from instinct to choice. Across the room, Vaughn adjusted her instruments again, but her movements had lost their earlier urgency. This is inefficient, she muttered. Anger would have been easier to manage. Elia didn't look at her. Easy doesn't fix things. Valen turned slightly, studying him. That statement did not belong to protocol. It did not belong to diplomacy. It belonged to something far less structured. And far more dangerous. Because if this interaction was repeatable, then the Council's entire classification system had a problem. Danger was supposed to be contained. Separated. Labeled. Not engaged. Not changed. Keth shifted slightly under the human's hand, then stilled again, as if deciding that movement was no longer necessary. The room remained quiet. Not tense. Not uncertain. Just watching. And for the first time since the incident began, Valen realized the situation had moved beyond damage control. This was no longer about preventing escalation. This was about understanding something the station did not yet have a framework for. A human, injured and fully aware of the risk, had chosen not to reinforce fear. And in doing so, had changed the response of a predator. Not suppressed it. Changed it. That was not an incident. That was a variable. And variables, Valen knew, did not stay contained for long. By the time the reception began, reality had stopped behaving like something the station could neatly categorize. The hall was filled with controlled noise, measured voices, formal greetings, carefully managed distance between species that preferred not to test each other's instincts. Light panels cast neutral tones across polished surfaces, designed to reduce tension. It wasn't working. Every delegate already knew. The human had been bitten. And the human was still attending. Elia entered without ceremony, sleeve gone, arm wrapped in clear mesh that revealed the healing beneath. No attempt to hide it. No attempt to dramatize it. Just present. That alone pulled attention. Pain was supposed to alter behavior. It hadn't. What followed pulled even more. Keth lingered at the edge of the hall. Not restrained. Not forced away. Just standing there. Watching. The distance between them was obvious. Deliberate. The cub didn't cross it. Not because he couldn't. Because he chose not to. Valen noticed that before anyone else did. Should the cub not be restrained? Counselor Thress asked quietly from Valen's side. Valen didn't answer immediately. Across the hall, Elia moved through introductions, responding to formal greetings, ignoring the subtle shifts in posture that followed him. Every species present recalculated him in real time. A human who had been attacked. A human who had not retaliated. A human who had not demanded consequence. Those variables did not align. I am beginning to suspect restraint is not the variable that matters, Valen said at last. Thress made a small, uncertain sound. Across the room, Keth shifted his weight. He wanted to move closer. That much was obvious. Every line of his body leaned toward the human. But he didn't move. He waited. The hesitation was almost painful to watch. Elia noticed him. Of course he did. He turned, not sharply, not dramatically, just enough to acknowledge presence. Then he crouched slightly, despite the strain it must have caused. You can come over, he said. The words were simple, but they changed everything. Keth moved. Slowly. Measured. Each step controlled. No sudden motion. No instinctive advance. Just approach. The hall went quiet without anyone intending it to. Delegates stopped mid-conversation. Not because they were told to. Because something more important had replaced whatever they had been doing. Keth reached the edge of the human space and stopped. Close enough to interact. Far enough to retreat. Balanced. Deliberate. You hurt because of me, the cub said. The translator carried the words clearly, but the tone beneath them was new. Not fear. Not panic. Awareness. She isn't wrong, Elia replied. Then why are you still nice? The question cut through the room. Direct. Unfiltered. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. That was not a diplomatic question. That was a real one. Elia considered it. Not long. Not theatrically. Just long enough to mean the answer mattered. Because pain doesn't always mean cruelty, he said. The words landed harder than expected. Sometimes it means somebody got scared before they knew what else to do. Silence followed. Not confusion. Recognition. Keth studied him. That is not how adults usually talk. Elia's mouth tilted slightly. Humans are weird adults. A faint ripple moved through the room. Not quite laughter, but close enough to ease something tight. Then the human did something else that broke expectation. He picked up a small magnetic serving sphere from a nearby tray, held it for a moment, then rolled it gently across the polished floor. It traveled a short distance. Stopped. No one moved. Except Keth. The cub bounded forward, controlled, but faster now, retrieved the sphere and returned. He stopped just short of Elia. Waited. Elia took it back. Nodded once. Then rolled it again. The second time, Keth moved faster. The third time, smoother. By the fourth, there was no hesitation at all. The shift was subtle, but undeniable. Not predator behavior. Not prey response. Something else. Something learned. Valen felt it clearly now. This wasn't containment. This wasn't suppression. This was training. Not dominance. Not fear. Repetition. Reinforcement. Administrator, Thress whispered, voice strained. Is the ambassador training the hazard species? Valen watched the cub return the sphere again, posture controlled, claws tucked, movement precise. He watched the human accept it without reward beyond acknowledgement. Then send it again. I believe, Valen said slowly, the ambassador would say they are becoming friends. The word felt inadequate, but it was the closest available. Around them, the hall had shifted. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But enough. The distance others kept from Keth lessened by fractions. A step closer here. A longer glance there. Curiosity replacing avoidance. Caution replacing fear. And somewhere beneath it all, a question. If this worked? If behavior could be changed without force? Then what else had the station misunderstood? Later, when the reception ended and the lights dimmed to evening levels, Valen found Elia in the garden dome. The artificial sky glowed faintly, stars reflected in the curved glass above. Controlled ecosystems lined the space, designed for calm. Keth lay beside the human. Not alert. Not tense. Curled in a way that made his size seem smaller than it was. Elia sat with one leg extended, injured arm resting near the cub's shoulder, not pulling away. You should be resting, Valen said. Elia glanced down at the cub. He didn't want to be by himself. Valen let that settle. Most envoys would have requested separation. Security. Distance. Control. This one had chosen proximity. Voluntarily. Most envoys would have demanded punishment, Valen said. Elia leaned back slightly, gaze drifting toward the artificial stars. Most envoys didn't grow up around scared animals and scared kids. Valen turned that over. There was something in that comparison that didn't align with standard classification models. You do not think him harmless, Valen said. Elia didn't hesitate. No. The beat. I think he's young. That difference, small in wording, felt enormous in implication. There's a difference. Valen stood there longer than necessary, watching the cub's steady breathing, the human's relaxed posture, the complete absence of tension between them. No restraint. No fear response. No dominance display. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't come from control, but from trust. And that was the moment the problem fully formed. Not the bite. Not the incident. Not even the reaction. The problem was what came after. Because if this pattern could continue, then the station's understanding of danger wasn't just incomplete. It was wrong. 3 days after the bite, the station did what it always did when something refused to fit inside its rules. It called a review. The chamber filled early. Representatives from species that rarely agreed on anything took their assigned platforms with unusual urgency. The air carried a quiet tension, not fear, not exactly, but the kind of anticipation that came when everyone understood that whatever happened next would not stay contained to one incident. Valen hovered near the administrative tier, report slate active, notes already layered with revisions that would have been unthinkable a week ago. At the center platform sat Ambassador Elia Rourke. No longer bandaged. The wound had closed into a faint line, the surrounding tissue already stabilizing beyond expected timelines. Even that had unsettled the medical division. Beside him, not restrained, not isolated, seated, claws tucked, tail wrapped close. Still, Jess stood 2 paces behind, posture ready, but unused. This session is convened to assess diplomatic risk and behavioral precedent, Counselor Menvar announced. His voice carried evenly, but Valen recognized the strain beneath it. There was no precedent. That was the problem. Ambassador Rourke, Menvar continued, do you confirm that the juvenile varic caused your injury without deliberate provocation? Elia nodded once. Yes. And yet, Menvar said, you have declined grievance, security separation, and hazard compensation. Also yes. A ripple moved through the chamber. Not loud. Not chaotic. But present. Confusion made visible. Why? Menvar asked. That was the question. Not about the bite. About the response. Elia didn't hesitate. Because he got startled, he said, voice steady. Made a bad choice. And knew it the second he did. Keth's head lowered slightly. I did know, he said quietly. The translator carried the words farther than he intended. I was ashamed before the human even bled. That shifted something. Valen felt it clearly. Not sympathy. Not yet. But recognition. The cub did not sound like a weapon being controlled. He sounded like something afraid of becoming unforgivable. Dr. Vaughn stepped forward, clearly unwilling to let the emotional tone take control of the session. The ambassador's survival is not indicative of reduced risk, she said. Human physiology compensated for damage that would have incapacitated most species. A projection appeared above the central platform. Bone density overlays. Clotting response metrics. Tissue stabilization curves. Externally, humans appear fragile, Vaughn continued. This encourages poor assumptions. Internally, they combine dense mineralized bone, rapid clotting, aggressive immune response, and elevated pain tolerance. She paused. In plain terms, the ambassador survived because humans are harder to break than they look. Elia raised his good hand slightly. I feel like I'm being graded. You are, Vaughn replied without hesitation. A faint shift moved through the chamber. Tension easing by fractions. Then Menvar redirected. Biology aside, he said, why comfort the juvenile instead of isolating him? That question carried weight. Policy weight. System weight. If the answer was wrong, the outcome would be simple. Reclassification. Restriction. Containment. Elia didn't take long. Because he was scared, he said. Guilty. And expecting the world to end. A slight pause. Punishment would have taught him that fear leads to pain. The room stilled. Mercy taught him that fear can lead to understanding, if you stop it in time. That did not land as philosophy. It landed as disruption. A security marshal clicked sharply from the outer tier. You cannot apply juvenile correction methods to a Category 5 predator. Elia glanced toward him. We do that on Earth all the time. The beat. Not with Varric, obviously, but with things that bite, claw, trample, or poison. That pulled attention. Full attention. You teach boundaries, Elia continued. You reward calm. You don't answer every mistake with exile. Valen understood then. This was not improvisation. This was method. The system the humans already used. That made it worse. Because it meant the outcome on the docking bay had not been an exception. It had been expected. The chamber shifted again, less certain now. More divided. It is possible, Valen realized, that humans do not treat danger as something to eliminate. He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. The council pressed for examples. And Elia gave them. Not defensively. Not dramatically. Just clearly. Wolves becoming companions. Animals raised alongside children. Creatures that could harm, choosing not to. Not because they were forced. Because they learned. You make companions out of predators, Counselor Thress said faintly. Elia shrugged slightly, careful of his arm. Sometimes, he said. More often, we build trust with things that have every reason not to trust us. He paused. And prove we're worth it. That line settled deeper than anything else so far. Because it shifted responsibility. From the dangerous to the one engaging with it. Menvar turned his attention toward Keth. And you, he said, do you believe you have changed? The cub swallowed. Visible. Deliberate. Then he straightened slightly. I asked before moving near the human this morning, he said. I used words when startled during meal service. A brief pause. I have not shown teeth at anyone in 2 days. Jess behind him exhaled slowly. Relief, barely contained. Then Keth drew another breath. Harder this time. I would like to apologize to the station, he said. That was not expected. Menvar hesitated. Then nodded. Proceed. Keth lowered himself fully, head bowed, claws hidden. Formal. Structured. Chosen. I acted on fear, he said. I caused blood and alarm. The chamber held still. I do not ask that this be forgotten, he continued. Only that I be allowed to become better than the moment I caused. Silence followed. Not disagreement. Not rejection. Something else. Permission. Valen felt it ripple outward. Across species. Across instincts. Across assumptions. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the willingness to allow change. And that was new. After the session ended, Valen found Elia in the outer gallery. Beyond the chamber, the station opened into wider corridors, quieter, less formal. Keth was there too. Moving. Controlled. Focused. Jess guiding but not correcting. You knew this would happen? Valen asked. Elia leaned lightly against the rail, watching the cub. No, he said. I just knew punishment wouldn't fix the important part. Valen followed his gaze. Keth stopped, adjusted his movement, then continued with deliberate care. Not instinct. Not reaction. The council will rewrite hundreds of pages of protocol because of you, Valen said. Elia folded his arms. Then maybe they needed rewriting. Valen looked out across the station. At systems designed for control. For classification. For certainty. And understood, with a clarity that felt both unsettling and inevitable. The bite had not started a crisis. It had exposed a flaw. Because danger, when met with force, behaved predictably. But when met with patience, it did something far more difficult to manage. It changed. And the station had no protocol for that. The station tried to pretend it understood. It issued temporary guidelines, formed committees, adjusted language just enough to make the situation feel contained. Words like monitored movement and behavioral review appeared in official documents, carefully arranged to suggest control without admitting uncertainty. Keth was placed under supervised status. A bright blue harness marked him as regulated. A distance rule followed him through the corridors. 2 body lengths from any official delegation. 2 body lengths from anyone who might file a complaint. 2 body lengths from becoming a problem again. Elia objected the moment the order was delivered. He's not hazardous cargo, he said, holding the document in one hand like it personally offended him. He's a kid under correction. The council prefers categories that can be filed, Valen replied. Elia glanced toward the garden where Keth lay stretched in filtered light, pretending not to listen. Children are difficult to standardize, Valen added. That sounds like a you problem, Elia said. It should have ended there. Policy established. Compliance expected. Instead, something else began. Valen did not record it at first. There was no template for it. No category. No procedural label. So he watched. And what he saw did not resemble containment. It resembled teaching. Ask first, Elia said one afternoon when Keth edged too close to a passing technician. The cub froze. Sebek looked at the technician. I can come closer? He asked. The technician stared for half a second longer than necessary. Then nodded. Keth approached again. Slow. Controlled. No flinch response triggered. No alarm. Good, Elia said. That word, simple, unremarkable, changed something in the cub's posture. Valen recognized it because it did not belong in any hazard profile. Mouth closed near people, Elia reminded another time when Keth grew excited over movement in the corridor. The cub stopped mid-motion, closed his jaws, forced stillness into his body. Not because he was restrained, because he chose to. Better, Elia said. And again, that shift. Not fear. Approval. Use words before instincts. That became the constant. Repeated. Reinforced. Expected. It should have been inefficient. Slow. Unreliable. It wasn't. Keth learned quickly. Not because he was forced to. Because he wanted to. That was the part Valen could not reconcile. A creature classified as a Category 5 hazard did not respond to approval. It responded to dominance. To threat. To control. This was something else entirely. The garden dome became the center of it. At first, staff avoided it when the human and the cub were present. Then they slowed when passing. Then they stopped. Then they stayed. Maintenance crews lingered longer than necessary. Junior clerks adjusted schedules to pass through at specific times. Even council aides, who insisted they were only crossing between assignments, began to pause. What they saw did not match expectation. A predator was not being subdued. He was being guided, given space to choose correctly. And choosing. Valen observed the smaller moments. The ones that would never appear in a report. When Keth knocked over a service cart and froze, scales flashing pale with immediate panic. Expectation dictated escalation. Damage. Fear response. Instead, Elia looked at the mess. Then at Keth. Okay, he said. What's the fix? The cub hesitated. Long enough for instinct to consider escape. He began picking everything up. Carefully. One piece at a time. No prompting. No command. Just correction. When he finished, he sat back, waiting. Not for punishment. For acknowledgement. Good recovery, Elia said. The cub's scales shifted to a deep, unmistakable blue. Satisfaction. Valen added that to his internal list of impossible observations. It spread. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. But steadily. Staff who had once filed complaints began reducing distance. A courier who flinched at Keth's approach watched him stop, step back, and say, I can give more space if you want. The courier nearly dropped her cargo. Then thanked him. Keth carried that thank you like something valuable. Repeated it later. Practiced it. Integrated it. The pattern held. Across interactions. Across environments. Across stress. It wasn't suppression. It wasn't avoidance. It was control. Chosen. Valen updated his reports twice. Then deleted both versions. Neither captured what was happening. Neither had the language. The station's turning point did not arrive with ceremony. It arrived with failure. A sharp metallic crack echoed through the central promenade. Valen looked up instinctively. The service rail above had fractured. A cargo trolley broke loose, its guidance lines snapping under shifting weight. It swung once, twice, then dropped, directly toward the crowded floor below. Panic spread instantly. Not outward. Sideways. People moved away from danger. Except where it mattered. A small Bolari child stood directly beneath the falling mass. Too young to process the threat. Too frozen to move. Valen's body reacted. But calculation slowed him. Distance. Angle. Not enough. Keth moved first. No hesitation. No overcorrection. No uncontrolled lunge. He launched forward with controlled force, claws digging into the deck for traction, body angled not toward impact, but toward the child. He hit the child hard enough to knock them clear. Both rolled across the polished floor as the cargo trolley crashed down where they had been standing. The impact shook the promenade. Glass shattered. Spice dust burst into the air. Alarms triggered. Security drones dropped from the ceiling, targeting systems locking onto the largest moving threat. Keth froze. Not because of the drones. Because the child was clinging to him. Crying. Alive. Stand down. Alaya's voice cut across the chaos, stepping directly between the drones and the cub. He just saved a life. The drones hesitated. Processing. Recalculating. The room held. Waiting. Keth lowered himself carefully, making sure the child did not fall. I moved too fast, he said. I'm sorry. I was trying to be careful. And you did good, Elia said, kneeling beside him. You did exactly right. The child's parent reached them seconds later, panic breaking into relief as they checked for injuries. None. No fractures. No blood. Just shock. And survival. The parent looked at Keth. Really looked. Not as a hazard. Not as a category. As the reason their child was still breathing. The child, still shaking, reached back toward the cub. Thank you, Big Bitey, they said. Keth blinked. You are welcome. Quiet. Careful. Certain. That was the moment. Not the rescue. Not the impact. The thank you. Because something shifted across the entire promenade. Witnessed. Understood. The cub had seen danger. Controlled himself. Chosen correctly. Not once. But consistently. And this time, when it mattered most. Valen stood in the aftermath, watching security stand down, watching staff approach instead of retreat, watching the narrative rewrite itself in real time. Later, when he filed the report, he paused at the classification field. Category 5 hazard. He deleted it. Slowly. Deliberately. Then replaced it with something that did not exist in any template. Juvenile under instruction. Demonstrates restraint. Demonstrates empathy. Demonstrates civic response. He stared at the words for a long time before saving them. Because this was no longer a theory. It was proof. And proof was harder to ignore than philosophy. Across the station, the pattern was no longer questioned. It was observed. And once something could be observed, it could spread. That was the real problem. Not that the human had changed one outcome, but that he had shown it could be done again. The station tried to argue with what it had seen. It filled chambers again, wrote new summaries, reframed the incident in language that felt safer. Some delegates insisted the rescue was an anomaly. Others claimed it proved nothing about long-term behavior. Committees formed, positions hardened, and for a brief moment, it looked like the system might hold. Then they brought the witnesses. The chamber was fuller this time. Not curious. Divided. Valen floated near the witness tier, reports slate-heavy with revisions he had never expected to write. Below, Ambassador Elia Rourke stood at the center platform, posture relaxed in a way that did not match the weight of the room. Beside him, no harness. No restraint. Only a simple collar marking status. Juvenile. Under review. The difference was not subtle. It was a statement. This chamber recognizes that the juvenile acted with restraint and civic intent. Menvar began, voice steady but tight. The question remains whether that action reflects reliability or exception. There was the last defense. If the behavior was an exception, the system survived. If it was a pattern, everything changed. With respect, Elia said, that's a very elegant way of asking whether kindness works. A few delegates shifted sharply. Menvar did not. This chamber prefers evidence. Elia nodded once. Good, he said. So do I. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't perform. He just laid it out. He bit me, Elia said. He regretted it immediately. He apologized. He came back. He learned. The pause. He improved every day after. Another. He saved a child when everyone else froze. The words did not need emphasis. They carried on their own. If that's not a pattern, Elia finished, I don't know what is. Silence followed. Not empty. Uncomfortable. Because the logic held. A trade representative shifted from the upper tier. You are describing training, they said. Not risk assessment. Elia looked up at them. On Earth, he replied, those are often the same thing. That landed harder than anything before it. Because it reframed the entire conversation. Not what is dangerous. What can it become? Valen felt the shift ripple again, deeper this time. The human stepped forward slightly, not to dominate the space, but to occupy it fully. Most of you treat danger like a category, he said. Label it. Contain it. Hope that solves the problem. He glanced around the chamber. We didn't have that luxury. A faint pause. On our world, a lot of things that could hurt us could also learn. The room stilled. Some delegates leaned forward. Others went very still. Some became companions, Elia continued. Some became partners. Some stayed dangerous. He didn't soften that part. But we stopped asking only, can this harm us? Another pause. And started asking, what does it become if we teach it better? The words settled across the chamber like something heavier than policy. Because they were not an argument. They were a framework. A different one. Menvar turned to Keth. And you, he said. What have you learned? The cub drew a slow breath. Visible. Measured. Not forced. I learned that fear is not permission, he said. The translator carried every word cleanly. That mouth stays closed near friends. A faint shift moved through the chamber. That if I feel too much at once, I speak before I move. Another breath. And if I cause harm, I fix what I can. And apologize for what I cannot. Silence followed. Not uncertain. Not resistant. Just quiet. Because the answer had landed where it needed to. Before anyone could respond. Movement at the chamber entrance. A small figure stepped forward. The Bolari child. Escorted but not held. The room turned as one. The child didn't hesitate. Didn't pause. They walked straight to Keth. And hugged him. No fear. No calculation. Just trust. He is nice, the child said, voice carrying further than expected. A small pause. And also fast. Something broke in the room. Not control. Not structure. Resistance. The last argument collapsed under something no policy could counter. Because fear could be debated. Data could be challenged. But this was outcome. The vote came shortly after. Not unanimous. It never was. But decisive. Category 5 designation, suspended. Movement restrictions, replaced. Supervised cultural residency, approved. More than that, a pilot program. Interspecies juvenile acclimation. Partially modeled on human developmental methods. Partially on station law. Entirely unprecedented. Valen read the final language twice. Then a third time. This is administrative madness, he said quietly. This is adaptation, Menvar replied. The words sounded unfamiliar. But it held. After the chamber emptied, the station felt different. Not louder. Not quieter. Just altered. Valen found them in the West Garden. Away from the formal structures. Away from policy. Keth stretched near a low fountain, posture relaxed but controlled. Elia leaned back against a stone bench, looking like someone who had just argued an entire system into rewriting itself and was too tired to celebrate it. You understand what you've done, Valen said. Elia glanced up. Besides annoy your legal staff? Besides that. Valen lowered himself to bench level. A gesture he did not make lightly. You have changed protocol architecture across multiple sectors, he said. Because you chose mercy in the first moments after being bitten. Elia considered that, then shrugged slightly. Seems efficient. Keth shifted, pressing lightly against the bench. I like when he does that, the cub murmured. What thing? Valen asked. Makes impossible sound normal. Elia smiled without opening his eyes. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me all month. Valen looked between them. At the human. At the cub. At the absence of tension. You are not leaving him behind, Valen said. It wasn't a question. Elia opened his eyes. No. Simple. Certain. If his mother agrees, he added, and the council doesn't panic again, I'm filing guardianship. Valen stared at him. You were bitten by him less than 2 weeks ago. Yeah. Elia reached down, scratching lightly behind Keth's neck ridge. The cub made a soft, content sound. And now he's family-shaped. Valen had no category for that. No protocol. No precedent. But for the first time since the incident began, he didn't try to create one. Because the station had already changed. Not all at once. Not completely. But enough. Enough that a predator could stand in the center of it. Not as a threat. Not as a problem. But as proof. And Valen understood, with a clarity that would follow him long after the human ship departed. Humans were not dangerous because they ignored fear. They were dangerous because they faced it, refused to let it define the outcome, and then taught the rest of the galaxy to do the same.